The experience of scarcity, of facing not enough, has shaped the very structure of the human mind. Long before supermarkets and supply chains, our ancestors navigated landscapes where resources were never guaranteed. Food, water, shelter, and safety emerged only through persistent effort and luck. This ever-present threat of deprivation left deep imprints on the brain, forging neural circuits designed to detect and react to any sign of shortage. Evolutionary biologists have explored how these ancient pressures sculpted both our cognition and our bodies, priming us to value what is rare and to act decisively when things seem to be slipping away. The roots of this response stretch far back in evolutionary history. Recent studies indicate that the human brain evolved in an environment where food scarcity was the norm, not the exception. Structures and neuronal networks developed specifically to respond to the intermittent availability of calories. When food appeared, the urge to consume as much as possible was rewarded by survival. Those who hesitated or failed to prioritize rare resources risked extinction. This scarcity sensitivity is not limited to food alone. The same neural mechanisms that once propelled a hungry forager toward a fleeting patch of ripe fruit now influence our reactions to limited-time sales, exclusive offers, and shortages of all kinds. Over millennia, as dietary shifts occurred, such as the transition from foraging to agriculture, these evolutionary patterns shaped not just eating habits but also broader aspects of decision-making. Scholars reviewing the evolutionary impact of diet have found that resource variability influenced how humans plan, cooperate, and even compete. The unpredictability of nature required our ancestors to become keenly attuned to signals of scarcity. This vigilance was not merely practical, it became deeply wired, a reflex that colors our judgments and priorities. Modern research into the preference for scarcity supports the idea that humans are drawn to what is rare, even from a young age. Studies investigating the developmental origins of this preference suggest that children, like adults, often value objects or experiences more highly when they perceive them as less available. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. In a world where the rarest resources, whether a hidden waterhole or a seasonal crop, could spell the difference between thriving and perishing, being attuned to rarity conferred a real advantage. The legacy of this adaptation lingers in the way people today respond to scarcity, often with urgency and heightened desire. Scarcity, of course, is not only a biological phenomenon, it is the core principle of economics. Economists define scarcity as the condition of having limited resources to meet unlimited wants. This basic reality underpins the entire field, shaping theories of value, trade, and market behavior. Economic scarcity can be absolute, where physical limitations prevent meeting needs, or relative, where the distribution and allocation of resources create shortages in practice. The challenge of how to allocate scarce resources is timeless, defining the contours of societies and markets throughout history. The interplay between evolutionary drives and economic realities is complex. On one hand, the ancient brain's response to scarcity, its urgency, its bias toward immediate rewards can lead individuals to make choices that are not always in their long-term interest. On the other, these instincts have enabled humans to organize, store, and innovate in the face of persistent shortages. The economic concept of scarcity is not just theoretical, it plays out in daily life, from the scramble for limited job opportunities to the competition for rare goods. Scarcity compels people to prioritize, to weigh costs against benefits, and sometimes to make sacrifices. Throughout history, the dynamics of scarcity have underpinned social and economic change. Analyses tracing these patterns show that episodes of resource shortage have spurred both crisis and creativity. Scarcity has, at times, led to economic shocks, social unrest, and even migration as communities seek relief from deprivation. The history of capitalism is especially marked by recurring cycles of scarcity and accumulation. Some scholars observe that the modern capitalist system is built on the assumption of endless growth, yet is continually confronted by the limits imposed by finite resources. This tension between boundless desire and real-world constraint has shaped everything from the rise of markets to the crises of the present era. Societies have never been passive in the face of scarcity. The question of how to adapt, how to stretch limited resources or invent new solutions has driven waves of ingenuity. Evidence suggests that when societies encounter increasing scarcity, their resilience often depends on creativity and cooperation. However, the pressure can also provoke conflict and competition, as individuals and groups struggle over what little remains. This dual potential scarcity as a crucible for both collaboration and contest echoes through the stories of civilizations past and present. At the individual level, resource scarcity does not just shape choices, it can transform behavior. Studies in evolutionary psychology and organizational behavior have found that scarcity tends to sharpen focus but can also narrow perspective. When resources are perceived as dwindling, people often redouble their efforts, becoming more competitive or even antisocial. The drive to secure what is rare may override norms of sharing or fairness, especially when survival or perceived survival is at stake. These patterns emerge in contexts as varied as business, politics, and everyday life. The link between scarcity and urgency is especially powerful in the realm of consumer behavior. Marketing research has explored how scarcity cues, such as limited edition labels or countdown clocks, exploit ancient survival instincts. The thrill that accompanies the prospect of acquiring something rare and the anxiety that sets in when availability seems threatened can lead to impulsive purchases and heightened demand. This dynamic is not accidental. It is rooted in the same neural architecture that once propelled our ancestors to act quickly when opportunity knocked, lest a rival seized the last fruit or the final drop of water. Yet the modern environment is profoundly different from the one in which these instincts evolved. In many wealthy societies, food and basic goods are no longer truly scarce for most people. The elimination of persistent scarcity, some researchers argue, has paradoxical effects. The neural circuits tuned to detect deprivation now respond to artificial signals, advertising, marketing, or social comparison rather than real shortages. In some cases, especially among those with lower incomes, scarcity signaling can lead to overconsumption as ancient drives clash with modern abundance. This mismatch may contribute to contemporary health and social challenges as the brain's old wiring struggles to adapt to new realities. Still, scarcity remains a fact of life for billions around the world, and its effects ripple through global systems. Economic shocks, resource shortages, and environmental change continue to test the resilience of societies. The question of how to adapt to scarcity, whether through innovation, cooperation, or migration, remains as urgent as ever. Some analysts suggest that bridging the gap between evolutionary predispositions and current needs will require new forms of social ingenuity. In the end, the story of scarcity is the story of the human condition. From the first foragers scanning the horizon for signs of food to modern consumers racing to claim the last item on a digital shelf, the same underlying forces are at work. Scarcity warps decision-making, heightening urgency, sharpening desire, and at times narrowing perspective. It has driven the evolution of our minds and the formation of our societies. Understanding its roots, both in biology and economics, offers a lens through which to view not only our past, but also the choices we face in an uncertain future. Picture a crowded store on the day of a flash sale. Shoppers, faces tense with anticipation, lunge for the last few discounted items. Phones buzz with countdowns and urgent notifications. Only 3 left. Sale ends in 10 minutes. In these moments, people make split-second decisions, grabbing products they barely considered just moments before, their rational thinking seemingly hijacked by the pressure of the clock and the dwindling supply. What is it about scarcity and urgency that so powerfully override our usual patterns of thought? The answer lies deep within the workings of the human mind, where ancient instincts and modern pressures combine to shape perception, judgment, and action in surprising ways. Cognitive science has revealed that scarcity does not just change what we want, it transforms how we think. When individuals perceive something as rare or fleeting, their brains process information differently than when abundance prevails. Researchers call this a scarcity mindset, a psychological state triggered by deprivation or the threat of missing out. This mindset is more than a feeling. It exerts measurable effects on cognition, motivation, and behavior. It could be sparked by a shortage of money, time, opportunities, or even social approval, and once activated, it often narrows focus and heightens reactivity. One of the most prominent mechanisms at play is loss aversion, a cognitive bias extensively documented in behavioral economics. Loss aversion refers to our tendency to feel losses more deeply than equivalent gains. In other words, the pain of losing something is felt more acutely than the pleasure of gaining the same thing. Scarcity and urgency amplify this bias. When a desired object or opportunity seems to be slipping away, the potential loss feels sharper and the urge to act becomes difficult to resist. Studies consistently show that people will go to greater lengths to avoid losses than to achieve comparable gains, especially when resources are limited. This bias does not just nudge us, it often pushes us into decisions that feel urgent and emotionally charged. Closely related is the scarcity heuristic, the mental shortcut by which people infer value from rarity. When something is scarce, we are more likely to believe it must be highly desirable or of superior quality, even without supporting evidence. This heuristic is not entirely irrational. Scarcity has often signaled value or utility throughout human history, but it can be exploited, leading to impulsive choices. The scarcity heuristic operates quickly, beneath conscious awareness, shaping preferences before more deliberate reasoning can catch up. The psychological roots of these responses are complex, involving evolutionary instincts, cultural conditioning, and the effects of modern marketing. Evolutionary theory suggests that our ancestors who responded swiftly to scarcity by securing food, mates, or shelter when they were available were more likely to survive and reproduce. Today, these ancient circuits are triggered not just by physical deprivation, but by cues engineered to mimic it: limited time offers, exclusive memberships, and the spectacle of others vying for the same prize. Cultural pressures and social comparison further intensify the effect. When people see peers securing scarce resources or celebrating unique opportunities, the fear of missing out, often abbreviated as FOMO, surges, making it even harder to resist the pull of urgency. Neuroscientific research has shown that a scarcity mindset changes the way the brain processes choices. Functional imaging studies reveal altered activity in regions responsible for goal-directed decision-making when individuals are primed to feel deprived. The brain's executive functions, planning, impulse control, and flexible thinking are compromised under scarcity. This effect, sometimes called the bandwidth tax, means that people experiencing scarcity have less cognitive capacity available for careful deliberation. Instead, attention tunnels in on the immediate shortage, and decisions are made with less information and caution. The consequences can be profound. When the mind is under the sway of scarcity, people are more likely to make self-defeating or even unethical choices. Experiments have demonstrated that scarcity can lead to increased impulsivity, a preference for immediate rewards over long-term benefits, and a willingness to bend or break rules. These effects are not simply the result of character flaws or lack of willpower, rather, they are predictable outcomes of the cognitive strain imposed by scarcity. Researchers have found that even temporary feelings of deprivation can impair self-control and diminish cognitive flexibility, increasing the risk of poor decisions. Urgency brings its own distortions. When time is perceived as running out, the brain lowers its threshold for action. Neurobiological studies describe urgency signals that reduce the amount of evidence required before making a choice, effectively sacrificing accuracy for speed. This tendency is so strong that people may prioritize urgent tasks over more important ones, even when the urgency is illusory, a phenomenon known as the mere urgency effect. The clock ticks, the pressure mounts, and suddenly rational evaluation gives way to action for its own sake. Not everyone responds to scarcity and urgency in the same way. Life history theory suggests that individuals' early experiences with abundance or deprivation shape their later reactions to resource shortages. Those who grew up in uncertain environments may be more attuned to signs of scarcity, more impulsive, or more likely to prioritize short-term gains. Yet, not all choices made under scarcity are reckless or irrational. Some research points out that people facing genuine shortages often make reasonable, context-driven decisions, carefully weighing risks and rewards based on their immediate realities. The challenge is that the cognitive load imposed by scarcity can make these calculations more taxing, leading to decision fatigue and errors over time. Scarcity also interacts with group dynamics. When resources are perceived as limited, competition intensifies, and social comparison becomes more salient. People become more sensitive to what others have or want, which can drive both anxiety and motivation. Scarcity cues harness these social instincts, creating feedback loops where demand increases simply because demand is visible. Marketers and policymakers alike have learned to wield scarcity as a tool for shaping collective behavior, though the long-term effects on well-being and satisfaction are mixed. The psychological impact of a scarcity mindset extends beyond financial or material domains. It can erode self-worth, increase stress, and foster a sense of competition or anxiety as individuals compare themselves to others and worry about falling behind. This mindset can become self-reinforcing, narrowing focus on what is lacking rather than what is available, and making it harder to break free from cycles of deprivation and urgency. Some scholars argue that cultivating a sense of abundance or sufficiency, focusing on what one has or can achieve, can help counteract the negative effects of scarcity thinking. Yet, shifting out of a scarcity mindset is not always easy, especially in environments where real shortages and social pressures are pervasive. Scarcity and urgency, then, are not just features of the external world but powerful forces that shape internal experience. They alter perception, amplify biases, and transform decision-making, sometimes for the better but often at a cognitive and emotional cost. By understanding the psychological mechanisms at play, the irresistible pull of loss aversion, the speed and simplicity of the scarcity heuristic, the stress of cognitive overload, and the contagiousness of urgency, people can begin to recognize when their choices are being shaped by factors beyond their conscious awareness. Awareness does not eliminate the effects of scarcity, but it can create space for more deliberate, thoughtful action, even in a world that seems designed to keep us chasing what is always just out of reach. Picture the modern consumer, phone in hand, eyes fixed on a glowing screen. A pop-up appears, only 2 left, act fast, and the heart rate quickens. A clock ticks down in the corner, counting the seconds until the deal disappears. In this moment, the machinery of scarcity and urgency is fully engaged, not as a relic of ancient survival, but as a real-time force shaping choices in the digital marketplace. Today, businesses, media, and technology skillfully harness the psychology of scarcity, steering our decisions with cues of rarity and the threat of missed opportunity. The result is a world where decision-making is constantly influenced by signals designed to trigger our deepest instincts, often without our conscious awareness. At the core of this phenomenon is what some researchers call the scarcity brain, a set of cognitive tendencies that once helped us survive, but now often lead to behaviors that benefit others more than ourselves. In modern life, scarcity drives unhelpful habits, impulsive buying, overconsumption, and even addictive technology use. Source 8. Research shows that when we perceive something as limited, our brains switch into a mode that prioritizes urgent action over careful thought. Source 36. Behavioral economics has mapped how these psychological levers work, revealing that rational decision-making often unravels under the pressure of scarcity and urgency cues. Source 29. We make choices that feel necessary in the moment, clicking buy, staying glued to an app, or copying others, only to regret them later. Businesses have taken notice. In today's competitive consumer markets, scarcity is as much an asset as any physical resource. Source 17. Marketers use a range of tactics to manufacture rarity and urgency, from limited edition product drops to low stock alerts and flash sales. Sources 44, 45, 46. These strategies are not random. They are grounded in research on how the human brain responds to threats of loss and fleeting opportunities. Sources 36, 37. Real-world campaigns are everywhere. Luxury brands release exclusive items in tiny quantities, while tech companies unveil new devices in controlled waves, fueling anticipation and long lines. Sources 42, 61. Even software interfaces are designed to create urgency. Digital platforms might display a dwindling number of available spots for a webinar, or show a countdown timer for a travel deal, all carefully calibrated to prompt immediate action. Sources 54, 51. The neuroscientific foundations are striking. Scarcity and urgency cues activate brain regions linked to threat detection and reward, the same circuits that once kept our ancestors alert to predators and fleeting food sources. Source 36. When a consumer sees a limited time only message or a nearly sold out badge, these neural networks spring to life, pushing the decision-making process toward speed. The result is an emotional surge, excitement, anxiety, and motivation that can override more deliberate reasoning. Scarcity marketing tips the balance toward impulsivity by activating the brain's reward system. Source 36. One of the most powerful psychological drivers in this landscape is the fear of missing out, or FOMO. Marketers capitalize on FOMO by creating social and temporal pressure. Sources 30, 31. They highlight what others are buying, emphasize rising demand, and use influencers to signal the desirability of rare experiences. Sources 32, 34. Research shows that FOMO does not just make people want products more. It compels them to act quickly, sometimes obsessively, to avoid the pain of exclusion. Sources 30, 33. This effect is especially strong among young consumers who are highly attuned to social comparison and peer approval. Source 32. The consequences go beyond shopping sprees. Fear of missing out can erode psychological and financial well-being, driving people to overextend themselves in pursuit of fleeting opportunities. Sources 32, 33. Social media has amplified these tendencies as never before. Influencers and platforms use scarcity signals to drive engagement, from selling out limited-run merchandise to creating the illusion of exclusive access. Sources 32, 34. This environment encourages imitation, as consumers copy the choices of peers and trendsetters, further intensifying demand for whatever appears scarce. Source 33. The ripple effects are real. Research shows that fear of missing out appeals make people more susceptible to marketing, prone to impulsive decisions, and vulnerable to feelings of regret or inadequacy when they inevitably miss out. Sources 33-48. Behind these phenomena are carefully crafted strategies. Marketers deploy scarcity and urgency through cues like low stock notifications, countdown timers, one-day sales, and members-only access. Sources 44, 46, 50. The mechanics are straightforward but effective. When people sense an opportunity slipping away, they feel compelled to act, often bypassing their usual filters for value or necessity. Source 49. This is not just theoretical. Case studies abound of businesses boosting sales through flash promotions and limited-time bundles, leveraging the psychological triggers of scarcity to outpace competitors. Sources 59, 60, 61. Digital interfaces are especially adept at this, using subtle design tweaks to nudge users toward immediate action, whether it is clicking a button or making a purchase. Sources 54, 51. The impact of these tactics reaches beyond everyday purchases. High-stakes decisions like buying a car or choosing a vacation are not immune to the pull of urgency. In these contexts, marketers sometimes use more subtle scarcity cues, aiming to balance the need for trust with the desire to prompt quick decisions. Source 47. Loss aversion plays a central role. When faced with the prospect of missing out on a desirable option, people are more likely to act, even if it means rushing an important choice. Source 47. The key, according to research, is to use urgency judiciously. Aggressive or deceptive tactics can backfire, eroding trust and damaging brand reputation. Sources 47, 55. Yet for every successful campaign, ethical questions arise. Critics argue that engineered scarcity manipulates consumers, exploiting cognitive blind spots for profit. Source 55. The risks are significant. Overuse of scarcity tactics can foster compulsive buying, lead to financial stress, and undermine consumer autonomy. Sources 48-55. Research highlights the potential for harm, especially among vulnerable populations such as younger users or those with a history of impulsive behavior. Sources 32, 33, 55. Ethical concerns have prompted some in the industry to advocate for transparency and restraint. Sources 55, 56. There is a growing consensus that while scarcity and urgency can be powerful tools, they must be used with care, ensuring that consumers are not misled or pressured into decisions they will later regret. Sources 55, 56, 57, 58. Some businesses have responded by adopting more ethical approaches to scarcity marketing. These include being upfront about actual stock levels, avoiding false countdowns, and using limited-time offers only when supplies are genuinely constrained. Sources 55, 56, 58. Others incorporate scarcity in ways that add real value, such as bundling products for a limited period to encourage discovery without creating artificial panic. Source 57. Guidelines for ethical use suggest focusing on authenticity, respecting consumer autonomy, and providing clear information about what makes an offer rare or urgent. Sources 55, 56, 58. Technology companies face particular scrutiny, as their platforms often blur the line between engagement and manipulation. Features like intermittent notifications, algorithmic feeds, and digital cues are designed to keep users engaged by leveraging scarcity and urgency, whether it is access to a new feature, entry to a virtual event, or a spot on a trending topic. Source 53. Critics warn that while these tactics are effective in driving engagement, they can foster compulsive behaviors and reduce well-being if left unchecked. Sources 53, 55. There is ongoing debate about where to draw the line between persuasive design and exploitation, especially as digital environments become more immersive and personalized. Sources 53, 55. Despite these challenges, scarcity remains a potent force in modern life, shaping not just what we buy, but how we interact with technology and each other. Source 8, 17, 63. The science of behavioral economics continues to shed light on why these tactics work, tracing them back to deep-seated patterns of thought and feeling. Source 29. At the same time, real-world experience and ethical reflection are prompting a reconsideration of how scarcity and urgency should be used, both in marketing and in broader social contexts. Sources 55, 56, 58. As we navigate a world saturated with signals of rarity, urgency, and missed opportunity, the challenge is not simply to resist these forces, but to understand them, recognizing when they serve our interests and when they do not. The story of scarcity in action is a story of ingenuity, persuasion, and the ongoing tension between the ancient mind and the modern marketplace. It is a story that continues to unfold, shaping the rhythms of everyday life in ways both visible and unseen. Imagine standing at a crossroads, the clock ticking loudly in your mind, a signpost reading, "Last chance," gleaming just out of reach. In that moment, your heart races and your thoughts narrow, driven by the sense that you have only one shot to secure what you need or want. This is the pull of scarcity and urgency, a force that can warp even the most rational minds. Yet, as research shows, this pull is not invincible. With the right tools, you can learn to resist, to step back from the brink, and to make clearer, wiser decisions, no matter how rare the opportunity or pressing the deadline may seem. At its core, the feeling of urgency is a reaction to perceived threat, an ancient function of the brain's stress systems. Neuroscientists have mapped how urgency and pressure activate neural circuits linked to rapid action and risk assessment, shifting our focus away from careful contemplation toward faster, more reflexive choices. When time is tight, the reactive brain, as some researchers call it, takes the wheel, favoring speed over depth. This response is adaptive in genuine emergencies, but in everyday life it can lead to hasty judgments and later regret. The challenge is to recognize when urgency is real and when it is manufactured. One of the most effective ways to resist the pull of scarcity and urgency is to pause and reframe the situation. Experts recommend a technique called the pre-mortem before making a high-stakes decision. Imagine that your choice has failed spectacularly. Then, work backward to identify what might have caused it to go wrong. This exercise, drawn from leadership and crisis management research, helps slow down impulsive thinking and brings the thinking brain back online. By rehearsing possible pitfalls in advance, you expand your mental bandwidth and reduce the risk of being blindsided by overlooked details. Another practical method, known as the 10-10-10 technique, asks you to consider how you will feel about your decision in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years. This simple act of mental time travel creates space between stimulus and response, weakening the power of urgency. Suddenly, the limited time offer or dwindling options lose some of their grip, and you are free to weigh the long-term impact rather than just the immediate consequences. Supported by research on decision-making under pressure, this approach encourages you to step outside the artificial boundaries set by urgency, allowing for a more balanced perspective. But what about situations where the pressure is internal rather than external? Many people find themselves caught in the throes of urgency bias, a mental habit of prioritizing whatever seems most pressing regardless of actual importance. Research indicates that urgency bias can derail productivity and well-being, as attention is siphoned off by tasks that feel urgent but are not truly significant. One strategy to counteract this is the Eisenhower matrix, a tool that divides tasks into 4 categories: urgent and important, important but not urgent, urgent but not important, and neither. By consciously sorting your decisions in this way, you train your brain to focus on what truly matters, rather than being swept up in the rush of the moment. The neuroscience behind these strategies is compelling. Researchers have shown that training the brain to recognize and resist urgency cues can strengthen neural pathways involved in self-control and rational thought. Practices such as mindfulness, deep breathing, and structured reflection have been linked to improved resilience in the face of time pressure. Over time, these habits create a buffer against the stress-induced narrowing of attention that so often leads to short-sighted choices. A central insight from recent studies is the distinction between real and manufactured urgency. Not every ticking clock or looming deadline is genuine. In fact, much of the urgency encountered in modern life is engineered by marketers, by algorithms, by social expectations. Learning to spot these signals is a skill in itself. When you feel the rush, researchers advise pausing to ask, who benefits from this urgency? Is there verifiable evidence that the opportunity will truly disappear, or is scarcity being used as a lever to prompt action? By cultivating this skepticism, you can short-circuit the automatic response and regain control over the pace and quality of your decisions. Beyond resisting the lure of urgency, another critical step is to address the underlying scarcity mindset, the persistent sense that resources are always just out of reach, never enough to go around. Research suggests this mindset can be transformed through targeted strategies. One approach is to practice abundance thinking, consciously seeking out evidence of sufficiency, recalling past successes, and identifying areas of life where resources are, in fact, adequate or even plentiful. While this does not eliminate real constraints, it shifts attention away from what is lacking and toward what is possible, expanding your sense of agency and creative problem solving. Tactics for overcoming a scarcity mindset include gratitude exercises, journaling about moments of sufficiency, and deliberately reframing challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats to survival. Studies suggest that these practices, when done regularly, can weaken the grip of scarcity on your attention and mood, making it easier to make measured decisions even when options are limited. Self-awareness emerges repeatedly as a foundation for rational decision-making under scarcity. The more attuned you are to your own emotional triggers, biases, and habitual responses, the better equipped you are to resist the pull of urgency and scarcity. Researchers recommend self-awareness exercises such as keeping a decision diary, where you record not only the outcomes of your choices, but also the thoughts and feelings that led up to them. Over time, patterns emerge, patterns that can be interrupted or redirected with conscious effort. Other self-awareness tools include mindfulness meditation, regular check-ins with a trusted friend or mentor, and guided reflection on values and long-term goals. These practices help create a gap between impulse and action, allowing space for the thinking brain to assess whether a perceived shortage or deadline truly merits a rapid response. By tuning into your inner landscape, you are better able to catch yourself before you fall into the traps set by artificial scarcity and urgency. Even simple techniques can have a powerful effect. Breaking large or overwhelming decisions into smaller, manageable tasks reduces the cognitive load imposed by scarcity, making it less likely that you will default to impulsive or reactive choices. Setting reminders to revisit important decisions after a cooling-off period can further disrupt urgency bias, restoring perspective and clarity. Research also highlights the importance of emotional regulation in resisting the pull of scarcity and urgency. When stress is high, the brain's decision-making systems become less flexible and more prone to error. Techniques such as slow, deliberate breathing, physical movement, or even stepping outside for a few moments can help reset the nervous system, restoring your capacity for thoughtful judgment. Ultimately, making better decisions under scarcity is not about denying the reality of constraints. It is about cultivating the awareness, skills, and habits that allow you to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be driven. The evidence suggests that by pausing to reframe the situation, distinguishing real urgency from manufactured pressure, practicing abundance thinking, and building self-awareness, you can loosen the grip of scarcity and urgency on your mind. These strategies, grounded in neuroscience and behavioral research, offer a path toward greater freedom and clarity, even in a world where time and resources so often feel in short supply. So the next time you feel the familiar rush, the pulse of urgency, or the ache of scarcity, remember that you have options. With practice and intention, you can resist the gravitational pull, broaden your perspective, and make choices that serve not only your immediate needs, but your deeper values and long-term well-being. The tools are within reach. The decision, as always, is yours.